heard about at least some of the TikTok celebrities that in most cases started off with just dancing on the camera, but probably never in a million years would you think that actually some of these dancers are all part of a cult. Today we're going to talk about the TikTok dance cult called 7M. Recently, this docuseries came out on Netflix. It's called Dancing with the Devil. If you wanna watch it, obviously I'm not going to mention everything that was in the documentary, so I highly recommend it. But before we'll start, for legal purposes, I have to say that everything I say in this video is alleged or just my personal opinion. Okay, so the docuseries follows two pairs of sisters as well as some former members of the cult, or maybe I should say cult. But first we'll talk about one set of sisters, Miranda and Melanie Wilking. So these two sisters absolutely loved to dance growing up. They started dancing at the age of 2. They also started a YouTube channel together, and it was their thing. They would always dance together. They had a great relationship, and the account called the Wilking Sisters at some point reached over 2 million followers, and they moved to LA to pursue the dreams of becoming professional dancers. At some point, Miranda was on the So You Think You Can Dance show. This was in 2015. She also danced for Katy Perry and Florida. That was the introduction. Okay, then in April 2019, the sisters met a well-known dancer named James Derrick, also known as B-Dash, and they started talking, and at some point the conversation kind of turned to one-on-one just with Miranda. So originally they were all in a group chat, and then Melanie was kind of kicked out, and Miranda just talked to B-Dash herself, and later they started to date. Now, B-Dash, or James Derrick, was already involved in a religious organization, and even Melanie was invited at first, but she said that, at first it seemed fun, it was a nice community, they didn't grow up religious, but something was just off. They were really demanding of her time. For example, she already made some plans to pick up a friend from the airport, but as she was on her way, all of a sudden they started to blow up her phone that she must come to the gathering right now to film some dancing videos, and she refused. She said, no, I have to pick up my friend from the airport, and they just kept blowing up her phone. And then later they didn't invite her to the next hangout as a punishment. So Melanie just saw some red flags, and she told Miranda that she doesn't really like what this group is about, but Miranda just wouldn't listen. So then Miranda became distant. She also made up a story that she cannot go to her grandparents' funeral. And then she admitted that she made that story up and that she has to film dancing videos instead. And I quote, she said, "I'm afraid I'll make a mistake. I'm just learning." And the family came over to visit her in LA, but she was just super defensive, and she stormed off at some point, and she refused to talk to them for a year after that. Also, Melanie and Miranda had an account together, and they even had some brand deals as well. they had no idea that she actually got married. And keep in mind that they seemingly had a great relationship before. So what happened? What has changed? So in 2021, she joined this dancing agency called 7M Films, and the name comes from the Seven Mountain Mandate, which are 7 aspects of society that religious believers or Christians seek to influence. So it says family, religion, education, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government. So already the name is religious. In order for somebody to join, they already had to have some form of social media following, and this was a well-established agency. Some of the dancers were participating in national ad campaigns, or even the 2022 Super Bowl halftime show. And if you joined, you were promised these amazing brand deals worth tens of thousands of dollars, as well as important connections. So this was a really big opportunity, right? Also, some of the dancers were Kylie Douglas, Aubrey Fisher, Kaylee Gray, and they all lived in this content house. You might have heard about this before. It's basically a house where everyone just lives together and they are supposed to create content together and collaborate. This is nothing new. This is exactly like the Hype House or Team 10 House, and there's more. But if you look at the agency's website, it's really strange because normally you would have at least shown, for example, the clients that they've worked previously or who they're representing, some sort of portfolio, but the website is just white and there's not much information there. It's really vague. So, the agency was founded by Robert Shin. Robert's family is heavily involved in the 7M agency. For example, his son Isaiah is a videographer for the dance videos. But there's much more. We'll talk about it. Now let's talk about the life of Robert Shin for a second. So he moved from Canada. He changed his name to Shin with double N. He is a former medical doctor and he has had multiple businesses previously. So for example, a production company, Imagining Images, that produced a movie called Random Encounters starring Meghan Markle. Yes, the princess Meghan Markle. Originally it was released in 2023 and then the movie was re-released in 2018. He's also had multiple businesses such as 2 mortgage companies, 2 real estate companies, a flower shop, cafes, but he has also founded a church back in 1994 called Shekinah. So the meaning of Shekinah is that it is an English transliteration of the Hebrew word meaning dwelling or settling, and it denotes the presence of God in some place. But actually in this case, you could say that Robert himself believed that he is the Shekinah. And in the 90s, he was mainly recruiting vulnerable Korean immigrants who were alone in the country and they had no community. And he would provide them housing as well as jobs. So it might seem really nice on the surface, but let's get into it. So Robert and Catherine, who is his sister, as well as Esther, who was his first wife, were in charge of this community. Mainly Robert though. For example, they have decided who's going to live with who and who's going to get this job opportunity, everything. Now community, but then all of a sudden they started to separate them. They couldn't really talk to each other. The roommate situation was decided by the Shin family, and they have separated them. They were assigned to a spiritual mentor upon joining. So that means that it had like a rank system, right? So newcomers would be assigned to a mentor, and then the newcomer would become a mentor as well. And each newcomer had to answer to a certain mentor. And then the mentor also had to answer to another mentor. And it was like this all the way up to Robert. Robert would also make some sort of divine being out of himself. He called himself the Man of God. Not a man of God, no, the Man of God. His wife would be called the Woman of God. And he believed that he has some healing power, that he is some kind of vessel of God himself on earth. And he would use this narrative to, well, control the members in the cult. I've already mentioned that Robert had various businesses, and he would give jobs to these vulnerable immigrants, but actually he wouldn't even pay them minimal wage. So, for example, he would give them $30 a week, even though they were working full time. Everything was controlled. The members also had to ask for approval for everything. For example, just to buy shoes. They had a very strict regime, so they would go to bed at 10 p.m., they would wake up at 5, and then pray at 6. Then they worked full time for little to no money, and even the food was controlled so they wouldn't gain too much weight. Then he married Hannah, so this was his second wife, and she would be in charge of all the money, and she would have access to everyone's bank accounts, and she could withdraw money as she pleased. They would have, passwords. Later they would also monitor social media, and it would work like this. So the members would get a deposit of thousands of dollars for their job, right? And then she would withdraw money as a donation to the church and to, well, Robert, really. And then the members would be left with, for example, only allowance of $80 once every 2 weeks. Actually, the state of California suspended the church in 2007, but nothing really happened. And in 2010, Robert admitted that the church had only 70 people at the time that donated, get this, $4.7 million in 8 years, from the years 2000 to 2008. And that's not all, because the members donated $300,000 to Robert himself. And I cannot really speak on this, but a lot of the times these donations, well, first of all, they were not to the church, they were just to Robert. Okay, let's make that clear. But also, because the Shin family had access to everyone's bank accounts, they just took the money. It was stealing, basically, right? So it wasn't just donations that the members willingly made. Let's make that clear. In 2009, a former member of the church, I keep saying church, it's more of a cult, but Lydia Chung sued Robert for $4 million because she had to donate assets that were worth $4 million. Robert also convinced her that her husband was controlled by a demon, and that's why he wouldn't join the church, which meant that she also lost her husband in the process. And maybe her husband saw some red flags and he told her, well, this doesn't seem right, and Robert convinced her that he's just possessed by a demon. And she also said that he was using mind control. He exerted undue influence and coercive persuasion, and as well as intimidation. But she lost the case because, given the religious context, a protection of the First Amendment applied, which means if you willingly join a cult and they pressure you to donate money, it's not a crime. It wasn't just about the money though. So in 2008, half a dozen girls barged into a gathering and they shouted at Robert. And I have to censor this for YouTube purposes. You have essayed me, because he required some adult favors, and he promised them that they would get the position of the woman of God, aka his wife. And even his sister Catherine spoke up against him. So here's what he did. He admitted that he has temptations, that he's just human, and he asked for forgiveness, and he had this human approach. So a lot of the members forgave him. Well, it was about half and half. Half members left, mostly women, but some have stayed. And after that, I feel like it just got so much worse, because, well, he already got away with it once, and now he knew what to do to get away with it again and again and again. So now let's talk about the two sisters, Priscilla and Melanie. So they have stayed after this incident. But later, in 2011, Robert started to make advances towards Melanie. And he said that while he has done so much for her, that she needs to pay her price. And it always started with just massages, and then it would evolve into something else, right? So he said that just like King David in the Bible, he is allowed to have mistresses because he is the man of God. And he said to Melanie, I want you to be my mistress. And of course Melanie did not like that, and she refused at first. So then he pressured her more, and he said that he wants her to sleep with other members. And at this point, she already planned her escape because she just didn't like where things were going. And it was, I think, she had 10 days left. So she said to Robert she needs to think about it for 10 days. Robert said, you have 3 days. So she had to leave the church abruptly. It was really dramatic. If you watch the documentary, her friend just pulled up with a fan and a bed. He thought that he will have to use the bed at some point. Luckily, he didn't have to. But she also had her sister Priscilla in the church, even though they didn't speak much at the time, and she called her. And she asked Priscilla if she wants to leave as well, and Priscilla refused. And Priscilla stayed for 11 more years in the church. After Melanie left, she was pressured even more by Robert to, well, be closer to God, which actually just meant be closer to Robert himself. And he had this narrative that if you left the church, it meant that you'll have a miserable life and you're going to hell for sure, and you're going to be cursed, basically. So Priscilla believed this, and she did everything to save her sister, which meant also being essayed for years by Robert himself. And she said that she felt physically sick every time. She absolutely hated it. But Robert convinced her that he actually has some sort of power of healing and that she just had demons inside and she needs to be purified through these encounters. But it wasn't until 2022 when Robert's wife Hannah, the woman of God, barged into her room and completely trashed it, because even though Priscilla wasn't sleeping with Robert willingly, his wife was just extremely jealous, and Robert didn't stand up for Priscilla, so she knew that she had to escape. She was no longer feeling safe. Well, she wasn't feeling safe for a very long time, but now it was even worse. So Priscilla left in 2022 and she spent 23 years in the cult. And if you watch the documentary, it's heartbreaking, because she said that, she dedicated her life to this organization, the Shekinah Church, and this is what came out of it. And now she's in her 40s, she's unable to have children, she's completely traumatized, she cannot really function in today's world because she's very isolated. It's just so sad. And she also looks at the house that used to be her home, the house of the Shekinah Church, that is also now the house of the 7M dancing agency, and this is a $2.5 million mansion, by the way. Also, Robert himself drives a very expensive Bentley. So let's go back to 7M, because now you know the full history of the Shekinah Church, Robert Shin, as well as 7M dancing agency. So, like I said, the dancers currently are in this mansion. Everyone just lives together. I already talked about the money extortion and what happens inside this house, right? But, okay, so here's what the former members have said. So they also had to sign NDAs about a religious service. Why? Because, okay, sure, for example, when it comes to certain secret projects, then it makes sense that you have to sign an NDA. By the way, NDA is non-disclosure agreement, which means that you cannot speak to the public about the project, the religious service in this case. They also talked about that the dancers made tens of thousands of dollars, but Robert imposed different fees, such as photography fee, rent, management fee, which was 20%, tithes fee, 10%, offerings fee, 20%, man of God fee, 20%, so that was a donation to Robert himself. So after taxes, the dancers would be left with 10 to 20% of the original income, which is exactly what happened in the Shekinah Church. Do you see the similarities? Robert also had this narrative that you have to isolate yourself from the family, and he said that you have to die to your family, you have to work on yourself, and eventually you can go back and save them as well, and you can bring them to God. And this included, for example, that they had to die to their children. One of the former members said that Robert would say that he has to die to his son, like he has to completely cut him off to actually help him. I have no words. This is a direct quote. Bury yourself and everything that reminds you of yourself. You gotta die to it. I already talked about how Miranda Welking isolated herself from her family, and this was ongoing for about a year. So in February 2022, Melanie and her parents went live on Instagram, and they addressed everyone's concerns and questions because nobody really knew what was going on behind the scenes, and people thought that Melanie, for example, cut off her sister, that she didn't want to speak to her, but it was actually the other way around. And they talked about the situation. So they said that, for example, even B-Dash, so that's James Derrick, cut them off as well. Whenever they tried talking to Miranda, they would get blocked. They were blocked on everything. They tried reaching out to James Derrick, aka B-Dash, no response. They tried to visit Miranda in the 7M mansion, no response. And that Miranda just cut ties very abruptly with Melanie and their management company as well, because they had some brand deals at the time. And that Miranda also sent some emails to her family, but it just seemed so off because it didn't sound like her. And it went viral, and all hell broke loose. So B-Dash on social media accused Miranda's parents that they were racist, which is why they had to cut ties with them. 7M released a statement, and I quote, "Miranda Derrick is a successful businesswoman and a loving wife and daughter. She cares very much about her family. It is pathetic to try to turn her private family matter into a tawdry public scandal just for clicks and clout." They also said that 7M and Shekinah are totally separate. And I quote, "It is true that the CEO of 7M, Dr. Robert Shin, is also the pastor of the Shekinah Church. It is not true that there are any business relationships between the two entities. The Shekinah Church and 7M are run and operated separate and apart from one another." Is that so? Let's look at it. Because everyone involved in the Shekinah Church is also involved in the 7M agency. So for example, Robert's wife Hannah is the CFO of Shekinah, and she also manages the 7M dancers. The 7M lawyer that also manages the legalities of Shekinah Church, Shirley Kim, is Robert's third wife. He has had so many wives at this point. I've lost count, okay? I'm lost in this. Daniel Joseph, who was director and producer of the 7M dance videos, who was also Shekinah's secretary, was married to Robert's daughter Chloe, and after this live video came out, they have left, as well as half of the dancers, because they just saw the red flags, but half of them stayed, as well as Miranda and James Derrick. And after this, Robert's strategy changed. So he said that they should meet their families, but just for show, really. And it was strange because they would meet up, but then Miranda didn't really seem her like herself, and they could not absolutely bring up the church in any shape or form, because then she would just go distant. And even when they were just talking, everything had to be documented. There's a live video where Miranda met her parents, and she was just so passive aggressive about it, because they met up, and even as they're approaching each other, she turned on the live and she says, "Since you want to make our lives public, we're gonna go live." And even James, her husband, said that we talk to our families, we just don't talk to Miranda's parents because of the hate and harassment. And later, even if they would meet up, like, everything had to be documented, and it was just so inauthentic and fake in a way, just for show. So then this documentary came out featuring Miranda, Melanie, Priscilla and Melanie dancers of sisters, and then other former members of the church Shekinah. And here is the response from 7M. The Netflix docuseries is a slanderous work of fiction born from a failed extortion attempt and invented for the sole purpose of gaining fame and fortune. 2 years ago, Melanie Lee Goldman, Priscilla Lee, aka Alicia Priscilla Lee, and their co-conspirators launched a concerted smear campaign to defame Robert Shin, his family, and his business associates. After Mr. Shin did not capitulate to Mrs. Lee's extortion demands, despite sworn statements from co-conspirators that confirmed the scheme by Ms. Goldman and Ms. Lee to disseminate widespread lies, Netflix recklessly provided a global platform to peddle a false narrative that is at the center of ongoing litigation. We will continue to pursue all legal remedies available to stop the spread of salacious lies and expect to be fully vindicated in court. Sounds very aggressive, doesn't it? But there's currently a civil case ongoing by Priscilla, but the Wilking family is also trying to bring up a criminal case against Robert Shin for the SAs. And if you watch the documentary, the police said that they just need more women to come forward. If it's just one victim, then they cannot do anything about it, which is kind of strange already. But then they brought up more women to testify at the police station, and till this day, nothing happened. Nothing. There's currently only the civil lawsuit ongoing, which is against Shin, 7M, Shekinah, and others that were filed by former dancers and members of Shekinah. And the case is set to go to trial in 2025. Nothing happened regarding the criminal case. Also, Miranda Derrick responded on social media, and her response is pretty long, so I'll read the main points. Hey everyone, just wanted to hop on here and say that I have seen the documentary. I want to start by saying that I appreciate the concern that has been expressed for my well-being. Due to pending litigation in which I am plaintiff in defamation lawsuit, it's not appropriate for me to comment on specific allegations. I cannot speak for anyone else but myself. I love my mom, dad, and Melanie, and they will be forever a part of my life. The truth is, we just don't see eye to eye at this time. I gave my life to Jesus Christ in 2020 and asked my family for some space in the very beginning to collect my thoughts and process my new walk I wanted to take with God. I also told my sister that I wanted to continue our Wilking Sisters social media page. She locked me out of our account, and when I asked for access back, she denied my request. I had no other choice but to start my own account and pursue my own career. In 2020, I went to Michigan to visit my family for Christmas. Melanie and I drove to the hospital to say our last goodbyes. Before we went into the hospital to do so, I started to pray for our papa in the car, and Melanie got offended, angry with me, and told me to stop and to never pray around her. Our papa passed away that day, so this was where she stormed off, and she also refused to go to her grandparents' funeral. I'll cut it short. I felt like I was being harassed. My parents and sisters are not religious. They immediately called me going to church twice a week a cult. I felt that if I went back to the funeral, they would try to keep me there and not let me come back to LA. I've been getting together with them over the past couple of years to make amends, move on, and work things out as a family. The documentary has created a further challenge between us as I work to overcome this public attack. No one likes to be portrayed as a brainwashed, not in control of their own life, shell of herself, human trafficked daughter and sister, when that just isn't the truth. I will add that I would have preferred that my family circumstances remain private. Respectfully, what I choose to do with my life is up to me. As I take this time to process and reflect on the situation, and I would appreciate your continued support around the Derek. After that, she also posted a video saying that the response has been, well, overwhelming. I mean, pretty much everyone on the internet is screaming at her that she's brainwashed, that she's in a cult. They threatened to kidnap her, which I obviously do not condone any of this. And that's where we are currently at in this present moment. The Shekinah Church is still active. The 7M Films Agency is still active. All of the dancers are still part of it. There is no criminal case ongoing against Robert Shin yet. So that's it. Now, before I'll move on, I just want to say that technically the Shekinah Church is Christian. But let's be honest, after you have heard everything I told you about this church, this has nothing to do with Christianity itself. This is about one man exploiting the religion for his own selfish needs and to extort money and to get himself rich, right? Now, I'll leave it up to you if you think the 7M Films is a cult. I personally feel like it is, because it checks out all of the cult boxes, you know, the control of their lives, you know, isolating themselves from the family, controlling their income, everything. So, what can I say? Also, the fact that if you have to look at it from a different perspective. This is Miranda's Derek whole life, her whole career. She became much more known after she joined 7M. She has had so many opportunities, and you know, Robert Shin probably, allegedly, controls her whole life, her whole career. So even if she wanted to, it's very, very difficult to leave. I mean, look at Priscilla. She left after 23 years, and it was extremely, extremely difficult. Melanie Lee spent 12 years in this organization, and it's just super hard to break away. The former members of 7M also said that Miranda has missed her family so much that she kept crying, but of course, like on social media, she cannot exactly speak up against Robert, even if she wanted to, let's be honest. So it is just a very, very difficult and sad situation. Anyways, that's it for today's video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye.